So of course, this is, we have to brain it in after the children, right? Like, I'm here, because they're so fun to see. The third week of our stewardship sermon series is amongst us today. And today is entitled, Growing a Garden of Gratitude. That's our whole sermon series. And today we are unpacking what it means for us to have good gardeners in our lives. I hope you got that from what happened up here. And we do that by unpacking a little bit the origins of the early church, of the followers of Jesus through the lens of Paul, one of the first leaders, and the letter to one of the first churches he evangelized in the city of Thessalonica. We began, as Julie reminded us, by remembering our good seeds, right? The DNA of who we are, not only the DNA of the Bible and of Jesus and the church, but the DNA of our very own church. And I started this sermon series by reminding us of the prayer and the dream and the blessing of our founding pastor, Reverend Dobstaff. He wrote a blessing that I shared, and I shared on social media, that was very progressive for 1961. Didn't you agree? Beautiful. That was the dream for our church, the DNA of our church, that we would be a progressive, open, lovely, affirming church in this little part of Wheaton in DuPage County and in this part of the state of Illinois. And then last week we remembered that in order to grow a garden of gratitude, we needed, and we struggled here to figure it out, what did we plant seeds in? Soil, dirt, right? And we reminded ourselves that what that means for us is we need a wide variety of experiences and people who think and believe and understand life differently than us. We need to be empathetic and open and kind. We need to be compassionate and gracious, to be grateful for the good and the bad and everything that happens, reminding ourselves that all of us are being taught continuously, and we are growing in an environment that is enriching us in many ways. The soil, in many ways, is what enriches and enlivens and makes growth happen in our garden of gratitude. And again, I say the irony, I don't grow very much. But one of the things I've learned in this part of the world is that many of you are gardeners. And so the first week, raise your hand if you have a garden that you tend to. Right? Many in our community. And we have many people who volunteer to tend to our own garden, right? Around the church. And so today we are talking about the other thing that we need to grow our garden of gratitude, which is good gardeners. These are the people that even now we give permission to help us navigate the world a little better in terms of our faith, in terms of our social health and our mental health. And I want to caveat that by saying that we live in a world full of strong opinions. Would you agree? Especially online. Can I get an amen? Right? And so that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about that we open ourselves up to every person that we may never meet who will give us feedback on our post, on our comment. I was on a forum last week, as I do, defending the LGBTQ folks, as I do, and was called all sorts of names. Things like not a real pastor, I must be enlivened by the evil one, all that kind of stuff. And I remember thinking, okay, Greg 3452. Okay. Sorry, I don't seem like a pastor to you, but I'm going to be okay. I'll recover from it. But the people who we allow into our lives, not only me as your pastor giving you input, but we have a men's group, we have a women's group, we have a prayer group, we have a fellowship, right? We have choir that gets together, musicians that get together. These are the people that give input into your life, that speak to us, make us better. Because we're actually better people when we do allow people in our lives to be honest and transparent with us. This weekend I watched a new short documentary on Netflix entitled Dads. Has anyone seen it? So it's only about 10 minutes, so I say that with people like documentary and then eyes rolled back. No, 10 minutes long, you can do it, on Netflix. It is the story of a weekend fishing trip with Matthew Shepard's dad. So if you know who Matthew Shepard is, if you don't, please Google it. He is considered one of the first targeted gay men, like not the first, but it became a big uproar in Wyoming. He was murdered basically for being gay. He invited several dads of transgender kids over for the weekend, and they had a lovely conversation they recorded, and it's about 10 minutes long. It was fun to see Frank Gonzalez, who advocates for his trans daughter, because I have met him, worked alongside him, marched in Austin with him. When I watched this sort of male bonding trip, because it was the dads, and overheard their discussions, I thought this is sort of like what community should be, and this is what Paul sort of is saying about community in the church. People who share honestly and hold each other accountable, but do it in love and tenderness. They shared their regret of not supporting their kids earlier and shared a passion for making sure their kids have the best life possible. So I commend this accessible and short documentary to you. It might humanize something and make it a little more personal. And I think that's what the church is. If you heard the words in the book of Thessalonians, what was just read by Karen, thank you so much, you heard a person longing to be with a group of people, didn't you? You heard a person speaking of gratitude of these people that he met in the city of Thessalonica, who began to understand and believe in new and interesting ways the way of Jesus, which was very different than the way that they were on before. Because we grow in environments where we know more, we do better. And the way that we grow and understand and learn is by sometimes being wrong and repenting and learning. And it's very basic. But we are a society that doesn't want to be wrong about things. Can I get another amen? We live in a society where we are right, we figured it out, and so we can yell at someone else who's figured it out differently. Correct? Do you see that happening on, is it just me that sees those videos? No? Okay. On TikTok. I think I've evangelized for this podcast before. There's a podcast called You're Wrong About. And I think and it doesn't get everything right because it's two human beings doing a podcast, right? But I love that sentiment. I love the idea of leaning in. And every week when I listen to it, I go, what was I wrong about? Maybe I was wrong about something. I want to learn something new. And I think there's something beautiful about that. The idea that we lean into the fact that we are always, always learning. Always, always wanting to grow. Always wanting to do better. And the thing that I think Paul is reminding us in this little church, in this little letter, at the very genesis and beginning of the early church, is that we learn and we grow best when we are each other's good gardeners. When we lean into love and care, right? We know this for truth. Like, there's even been studies done where you have a plant and you yell at that plant. What happens? It doesn't grow. Like, there's literally been studies on this. People have done this. So I don't understand why so much of the church can be at times a place where dogma and doctrine can be held in such harsh ways and people can be so mean and unkind and unfriendly towards one another. Because anyone knows that the way you grow is to be loved and cared for, given nurture, given water, hydration. It's so funny because we kind of, again, I'm sorry, I apologize now. We're belaboring this garden metaphor, right? And you get one more week of it. You're welcome. And so we were joking like, well, they don't really put water on you. But we do, hydrating is important, right? Hydrating is important. Things that make us better, things that quench our thirst, things that give us life make us better. And I know that we're living in a world with big loss, right? We're living in a world where we're hearing about Israel and Gaza, where Lewiston, Maine happened not too long ago, where we're even just now seeing the effects of the genocide in Darfur and Sudan. The images that are accessible to us 24 hours a day can be heartbreaking and painful, and even in the midst of our own pain and grief. I want to remind you, this is a plug in the middle of my sermon for, I don't think our church has ever done a blue or long night Christmas, but we're going to do one this year on the 21st. And it's basically a moment that we take in the middle of December, which is my favorite month of the year. Advent and Christmas are my favorite. But we all know, like for me, my mom passed away in 2010. So Christmas has forever been different, right? And many of us who've experienced loss or pain or had diagnoses, it's okay to feel sad during Christmas. Can I get an amen? It's okay to feel sad. And so we'll come together and light a candle and we'll have a moment where we can remember that the holidays don't always live up to our expectations, particularly if we experience loss or pain. Plug over. And I think that's why we sort of collectively grieve for celebrities. Not because the big losses aren't important. They are, but they're overwhelming. I feel overwhelmed by the images that come out and the things that we experience in the world. And so for me, the recent loss that I spoke a little bit about, and it sounds silly, and I promise you I don't think it is, was the loss of Matthew Perry. Everyone watch the TV show Friends? Now we lift that loss up because the extent of loss in our world is so overwhelming, we have to personalize one, right? And so we look to someone who struggled with drugs and addiction, who by all accounts was someone who had such privilege, right? Such humor. And again, for me, Friends was, for better or for worse, all of it doesn't hold up this many years later. It's the story of my own sort of growing up, in New York City with a coffee shop. No, I wasn't in New York City. But I will tell you, my friends in our 20s, we did have a coffee shop in Pasadena that we would go to, and we did kind of feel like friends, just adorably so. And of course, it no longer exists. It was down an alley, and it had poetry readings, and it was a very dramatic place to have big cups of coffee. Before Starbucks, we thought we were very, very fancy. But it was a place where we talked about our lives and our milestones, and we navigated the tricky twists and turns of life. So for our stewardship sermon series, Growing a Garden of Gratitude, we are unpacking, I think again, to think through what does it mean to be community in the church, this first letter. This church that loved and lived, experienced drama and pain and difficulty, but longed to live out the words and work of Jesus that they came to know. We have seen there in this moment with Paul that some evangelism in the new way of Jesus and God, there was some drama and jealousy. The good news isn't always good to everyone, right? It stirs up anger and frustration. I think this letter is a glimpse into the reality of establishing the early church of Jesus way back in the beginning of it. It took some energy to travel and get the message out, the good news of Jesus. And we realize that drama exists, and anytime there are three people, there are always four opinions, right? And yet, Paul leans into not the differences, but the gratitude. Notice in the letter that Karen read, the part of it we have today, how grateful Paul is for this little church, how much he loved them. He says things like, I long to be with you. I pray for God's grace and goodness for you, right? He uses those words. And I think that is the true understanding and meaning of church. Church isn't necessarily just about doctrine or the preacher preaching. Can I get an amen? Or the choir singing, although I love it, or the musicians playing, or a band leading. The church is about longing to love and care for and accept each and every person that walks through that door. That door, that door, that door, that door. There's many doors. We long to love them. To Paul, his theology was deeply personal. It wasn't just a highfalutin, here are the dogmas and things I want the early church to know. Do you notice that? There's not a lot of theology at the beginning. No, it's the love and care for neighbor. Good gardeners love what they do and care for their gardens. In fact, I've made the mistake of asking several of you who are just profound gardeners about your gardens, and you go on and on and on, right? Like I do about Taylor Swift, but that's something different. Because you know every aspect, don't you? What you planted here and what you planted there. And this needs a little different, then that needs a little different. And you know all of that because you have made it personal to you. You have made it personal to you. And again, the key to a good garden is a good gardener. And Paul shows us how to be a good gardener. Two simple things he does. He's risky and bold as a truth teller of the good news, even if it causes controversy. Secondly, he's a leader who does everything out of love for all the people. It's all about love of God, neighbor, and self. And so regardless of getting it right or perfect, we learn that Paul loves this church, and he believes that love is what will call them to be greater and greater and do amazing things for what Jesus talked about, which is the kingdom, right? This new realm that's being created through the church. We learn that he loves them so much he sends Timothy, his closest friend, to them to get a report and to share his love for them. For Paul, church was about people, full stop. Again, I love from the beginning, any and all correction in the early church, any and all theology that's discussed, always is in the context of relationship and love. Always in the context of relationship and love. Since I came here a year ago, I've been asked what the secret is to growing the church, right? It's no secret that in the last, decade or so, the church overall has been declining. We can agree on that. Like, not just this church, but the overall church has been declining in some ways. And COVID was difficult. And so, how do you grow a church? And I always joke and say, if I knew the secret, I'd be richer and probably working somewhere else as a consultant, right, in this magic way. But I actually think there is a secret to growing the church. And I think Paul teaches us this in this little book. Love people first and always. Care about them more than being right. Care about the church and how it treats its own and its community. Once we love our community, we're making it as clear as possible that everyone is welcome here. All people are welcome here. Yeah, that means a few rainbows, and I love that. And we don't do things here in openness and love and grace and goodness and progressiveness because it's political or fashionable. We do it because what I read in the early church letters, what I read in the gospel of Jesus, is that everything goes back to love. God, neighbor, self, love, sacrificial love, inconvenient love. And so my prayer and my hope is that as we continue to navigate the tricky waters of culture in this world, that our hearts would continue to break more and more in such ways that we are loving people more and more. And may we receive the prayer that Paul sent to this little church in Thessalonica, that God would increase their love for each other and everyone. You notice he uses the word everyone. He means the community. That the greatest prayer he had for this little church was that they would love each other more and learn to love everyone more. And that our hearts and minds would be strengthened in God's love. And also that may we continue to receive the loving correction and care from our gardeners. So, my beloved community, as we continue to lean into Stewardship Month and our gardens of gratitude, my prayer and my hope and my greatest desire for all of us is that we will be grateful. We will be grateful because we don't always have to be right, but instead we should always be loving and kind. So may we be a church that loves ourselves, loves God in profound ways, and in that loves this community, our neighbors, and all of those who exist around us more and more and more. May we lean into the love of God as seen through the love of neighbor. May it be so. Amen.